Welcome to Moffat on Money. I'm Clay Moffat, and I'll be with you here today, along with the Wonder Dogs Chunk and Tallulah. This is Chunk. This is Tallulah. They are two of my top advisors and my closest confidants. They keep my secrets pretty well, so they're faithful at that. I rely on them for their advice and expertise beyond measure. Today we're going to be talking about FTX. I received some requests asking me, what is FTX? What's the deal with Sam Bankman-Fried? And how does this reflect on the market and cryptos? Some good questions I'll try to answer. Also, Chunk and Tallulah are in the corner reminding me to ask you to subscribe and hit the like button. Now, my attorneys have given consent, so don't hesitate. If you like the content, heck, if you don't, hit the like button anyway. We're just getting started and I need to boost those rookie numbers. So let's start off. What is FTX? Well, if you're a distant observer, it's fascinating. If you're a politician, it looks like a sugar daddy and corruption. If you're a journalist, it's blood in the water. It's a lot of blood, and you're like a megalodon just swimming around looking for the meat. An endless supply of blood so far. If you're an investor in FTX, it looks like a big ass black hole. I mean, think Giselle, think Tom Brady, think Shaq O'Neal, think Stephen Curry, Kevin O'Leary, the list goes on. There's a ton of hedge funds and pension funds invested in it. IVP, Ontario Teachers Union, SoftBank, Sequoia. So a wide and diverse range of people and institutions, most of which who are relatively sophisticated investors, supposedly intelligent investors, or who have advisors who are supposedly intelligent. If you're an investor not in FTX, well, it's an education based on the tuition paid for by those previously listed. I keep telling my students, never invest in something you don't understand. It's an extension of my rule number 2, stupid should hurt. And so this session is pretty much dedicated to stupid should hurt. Stupid does hurt. Let me give you a little history on Sam Bankman-Fried, or SBF as he calls himself. I'll probably refer to him as Sam. He was born in 1992, on or next to the Stanford campus. His parents are law professors at Stanford. And Sam is Sam was a pretty bright kid. He attended the U.S. Canadian Math Camp for gifted high school students. He graduated from MIT with a degree in physics and math. Not an necessarily easy accomplishment. And he started at Jane Street Capital in 2017. He was there about a year and a half, and left to start Alameda Research. Keep in mind, he owned 90% of Alameda. And you'll hear that name repeatedly through this session. So keep in mind, 90% ownership, 90% ownership. They describe themselves as a quant trading firm. A quant trading firm is just a firm that relies on a lot of math, algorithms, complex, sophisticated calculations in order to make investment determinations. They are, relatively common. And I honestly don't know how quant-based this firm was. I think they were working from their house, and they mostly traded Bitcoin, taking advantage of something known as the kimchi premium. I think when he was at Jane, he came across this kimchi premium, which is basically exploiting a price differential in Bitcoin in the various markets of Hong Kong, Korea, Japan, and the US. The idea is that you can buy or could buy Bitcoin cheaper in the US and Hong Kong than you could in Korea or Japan. So if you bought it in the US or Hong Kong, you could then sell it in Korea. Well, the issue with the higher price in Korea had to do with their laws and regulations. It was difficult to send money out of Korea. So if you're buying Bitcoin from an international firm or exchange or something, which most of them are, you were limited in what you could buy. And there was a fair amount of demand beyond what they could, purchase in Korea. Well, Alameda kind of came up with this arrangement to accept cash. They literally would have people, the story goes, they would literally have people with bags of cash standing outside their offices waiting to come in and buy Bitcoin. And then they would be, granted a share or portion of Bitcoin. Alameda would take this cash and had arrangement with apparently hundreds of different banks to where they could distribute the cash so there wouldn't be anything highly unusual about their cash deposits. What does that sound like to you? That's kind of an interesting arrangement. Now, the advantage to Alameda was that this kimchi premium averaged probably, from what I can tell, about 5%. And for a few months, I think it was around June of 2018, that premium got up to 45, 50, topped out at around 55%. So there was some, fair money to be made with this opportunity. We call it an arbitrage opportunity because arbitrage is simply exploiting different prices in two different markets, like the New York Stock Exchange and the London Stock Exchange. Well, if you see a stock that's cheaper on New York, you can buy it and turn around and sell it on the London Exchange and capture that price difference. If you basically borrow the money to do it, we technically call that arbitrage. And that's kind of similar to what was going on here. So it was profitable to do that in Korea and to a little bit lesser degree in Japan. Same deal. Well, this went on for a little while, like I say, a year and a half. And then Sam decided to found FTX in 2019. Now, keep in mind, Sam was about 26 at the time, and he founded it with a guy named Gary Wang and a couple other people with $8 million in seed money. Now, FTX was founded as a crypto exchange. It's an exchange is a marketplace where assets are bought and sold. Stocks, bonds, cryptocurrency. Crypto exchanges are all online. The assets they trade are digital. And the interesting thing about the creation of FTX, which Sam owned, was that Alameda was the market maker. Alameda was the sole and exclusive market maker. The market maker is the firm that handles the trading. So like if you want to go and you want to buy a stock of IBM, you're actually going through a broker or market maker who sells you the stock. And then if you want to buy, you'll actually sell it to a market maker. So they maintain the market in this asset. Well, Alameda was the market maker for FTX. Kind of a unusual relationship, which we'll get into a little bit more as we go along. Now, when Sam created FTX, he left his girlfriend, Caroline Ellison, who was 24 at the time, to run Alameda. Within 6 months, they were able to sell 20% interest, 20% of FTX to a large Chinese cryptocurrency exchange called Binance. Now, they sold it for $100 million. So they sold 20% for $100 million. This gave the firm a $500 million valuation. 20% for $100 million. That means the other 80% were worth $400 million. So $500 million valuation. And we'll use that same kind of math as we go through. FTX lived about 3 years. Sam became a billionaire, worth up to $26 billion, billion with a B. He made an art out of freeing other people's money for his use. Sam freed the money, just like Bernie Madoff made off with people's money. In some ways, and I've heard several people refer to FTX as a Ponzi scheme, but technically it really wasn't a Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme is basically a pyramid where the people on top or higher levels are paid from the people in lower levels who enter after them. FTX didn't necessarily do that with all the proceeds, though it may have done that with some, but really the main beneficiaries of the client money invested in FTX were Sam and his inside circle. FTX owned about 130 to 150 companies. We don't know the exact number yet. Most of them shell companies, which is very interesting. Why do you create an organization of shell companies? We'll get into that as we progress through this as well. Now, Sam was the toast of the town in DC, San Francisco, LA, all the nice, progressive, woke areas, because he spoke altruistically. He spoke of an effective altruism. What is effective altruism? Its proponents talk about the gift of making money not for yourself, but for the world. Okay? It's kind of the beauty pageant equivalent of walking down saying, you know, I support world peace. And I like beauty pageants. But anyway, he became the best known proponent of effective altruism. I may call it EA sometimes. A really utilitarian altruism, promoting projects that have the greatest effect on the greatest number of people. It's an extension of doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people. I would love to say, you know, he donated out of his billions and billions and billions generated to these projects, but the facts are he really didn't. He donated almost nothing, less than 0.01% of his total wealth went to some form of charitable donation, which is a pittance. Now, interestingly, Sam was always presented as an individual who drove a Corolla and lived in an apartment with 9 roommates, something along that line. He was never presented, to my knowledge, of having a yacht and living in a $40 million Bahama penthouse with over $300 million in private real estate. Hell, even his parents owned a $16 million vacation home in the Bahamas, courtesy of FTX. Now, Sam's charitable desires, as he referred to them, led to him seeking the naming rights to the Miami Heat basketball arena for $135 million. He sponsored an F1 racing car for millions per year. And FTX even ran a Super Bowl ad for $30 million. Sam, you know, promised publicly several times to donate 1% of all fees to charities. Well, this kind of altruism, or at least speaking of it, talking of it, built up a lot of goodwill among those in power and with money. But the net effect was this publicity, this goodwill, this influence he gained simply aided in the whitewashing or of fraud or laundering that occurred through FTX. So basically, Sam made billions of dollars from an unregulated offshore exchange, issuing his own air token. He spends hundreds of millions of dollars giving to media outlets, crypto lobbies, and politicians, and pushing environmental issues. There's just something ethically, morally broken about issuing your own coin, air token, or as I refer to them, shit coins, in exchange for cash. Just a digital pump and dump scam. What do I mean by pump and dump scam? Well, in stocks, if you buy a little known ma and pa firm, there's there's different exchanges. There's the New York Exchange, American Exchange, NASDAQ, these big exchanges. And then there are smaller exchanges called the gray sheets and the pink sheets. Literally, they got their name because in the back of the stockbroker's office, there was this index file with pink cards, and you'd pull out a company out of that. Nobody bought them, sold them, traded them, whatever. Very, very thin market. Very, very little trading going on in that market. Well, a pump and dump is where, if you ever saw The Wolf of Wall Street, remember when he was just getting started, he bought like an old gas station or, and put tables, ran a bunch of phone lines, and then he and the guys would sit around the tables just smiling and dialing, talking about how they had the next latest, greatest stock. It was going to go to the moon. You had a small opportunity here, a small window to try to invest and secure your financial future going forward. Well, that's a pump. They would get people to start buying this stock, and the price would start rising when they had already bought some shares. And then as the price started rising, they would sell their shares, pump and dump. So literally in a day or two, they would get the price up, dump their shares, make a pretty good profit, and hit the road to the next, empty gas station where they could set up another firm and another phone bank. It's called a pump and dump scam. It's modestly illegal if they ever get caught. So that's a little bit about Sam's history. Now let's look at FTX in particular, the crypto exchange. Crypto assets are just digital money, or coins as they're sometimes referred. You're given literally a online credit for depositing US dollars and buying these coins. It's a form of internet money. Now, I talk about it in my first video, Bitcoin, but a lot of people really don't understand crypto. It can be confusing. It can be complex. So it needed a face or a spokesman to make it more widely accepted and understood. This person would go out and promote the advantages of crypto somewhat endlessly as being safe, stable, even unhackable, even though not all crypto is safe. Not all crypto is stable. Not all crypto is unhackable. But ignore that for now. Enter Sam and FTX, the face of crypto. Now keep in mind, start with Alameda. How do you know fraud when you see it? Well, Alameda had advertising material that basically promised, anytime you see a broker or a salesman promising you high returns for no risk, that's all you need to know. It's a fraud. Nobody can promise you high returns with no risk. Risk and return are always commensurate. If you have high risk, you can expect higher returns. If somebody's talking about high returns, you can expect high risk. Nobody pays you high returns for no risk. It just, not in this world. So here's on your screen is a picture of part of the advertising material that Alameda would use. And you'll notice this part right down here. Do y'all like my big arrow? I blew that thing up for you. It's high returns with no risk. That's all you need to know. These loans have no downside. That's all you need to know. It's a scam. Okay? You're dealing with crooks. That's how Alameda, got started. High returns, no risk. Then Sam, as I mentioned, came up with the brilliant idea of forming FTX, new era crypto, and he was able to convince millions of users, fund managers, politicians, that they should share his altruistic ideas and promote those ideas by investing with him in FTX. They were intertwined. They were one and the same. Great idea, because over the next 2 years, FTX became the largest crypto exchange in the world, valued at over $32 billion. Sam's own net worth, as I mentioned, grew to over 26 billion. He became a major funder of liberal politicians, celebrated in DC. He was the face of not only crypto, but this EA, Effective Altruism. Now, over the next couple of years, FTX bought several firms. There were a number of acquisitions, mergers, or loans to troubled firms. Sam would talk about how he was doing it to help stabilize the industry and promote the industry and ensure the security and safety of the industry, all sorts of good, noble reasons to bail out those firms. The one thing he neglected to mention was that most of them had been fined or censored by the SEC and the FDIC, whoever, for selling unregistered securities, for fraud, for misrepresentation, whatever. Can you kind of see a pattern forming here? Then things started happening. Okay. FTX had its heyday, its fame, acquired its fortune, but for people paying attention, things started happening. In August of 22, the FDIC, which is the agency that insures your bank deposits. When you go in a bank branch, you see the little FDIC sticker on the door. Well, they issued a cease and desist letter to FTX, to Sam Bankman and the president Harrison, because both Harrison and Sam had been advertising that deposits with FTX were guaranteed and insured by the FDIC, which was not true. FTX was never registered as a commercial bank, never associated, affiliated, insured by the FDIC. So now you have this agency stating publicly, federal agency stating publicly, quit lying about your deposits. That's what a cease and desist letter is. Their veil of innocence had finally been yanked away, removed. The reaction in the market, pretty much nothing. Things continued. September of 22, Bloomberg had an article pointing out the incestuous relationship between Alameda and FTX, which had not been disclosed previously. Even though they didn't know or discover that Sam was owner of both, they did find out that Alameda was the only market maker and a large depositor in FTX, which is illegal according to the SEC. And the reason is because if that occurs, it gives the market maker power and influence to manipulate those deposits, to manipulate the market value of the stock, allowing them to make money while other investors lose money. So that needs to be there needs to be no relationship between the two. Market maker needs to be independent of the companies they represent or conduct a market in. After the bankruptcy, the trustee or executor for the bankruptcy, a man by the name of John Ray, who is of some renown because he also handled the Enron bankruptcy. He's been involved in handling and processing several large bankruptcies. So he's got a pretty good track record, knows what he's doing. He disclosed that Alameda also had an exemption from FTX's, quote, auto liquidation protocol, which is a fancy word for margin calls. Now, margin call. What's a margin call? In buying stocks and or crypto or bonds or some other assets, certain exchanges will allow you to borrow money to buy those assets. If I want to buy $1 stock, but I only have 50 cents, I can borrow 50 cents and buy the $1 stock. So I have 50 cents of my own money, equity or margin, and 50 cents borrowed on the stock, which is held as collateral also. Well, if the stock price drops 20 cents from $1 to 80 cents, then I still owe the full 50 cents in a loan. But my value, my equity, my margin has dropped from 50 cents to 30 cents. So that 20-cent loss in the stock price comes out of my cash, not the amount I borrowed. Well, the broker who lent me the 50 cents to borrow the stock is never, ever, ever going to lose money on a margin trade. So they do something called a margin call, where they literally call you and say, hey, you need to contribute more cash to your margin account to bring it back up, or we're going to close out the trade. And they can do that. They can sell the stock for 80 cents, take their 50 cents plus interest, and give me the rest, whatever's left. So if I don't want that to occur, I have to cough up more cash to whatever level they say, to where they're comfortable that their loan is still secure from market price fluctuations. So that's a margin call. Well, Ray disclosed that FTX had given Alameda an exemption from margin calls. So they lent, FTX, we find out, lent Alameda billions of dollars against collateral, crypto coins. But as the value of those coins fell, never issued a margin call demanding cash from Alameda. So it gets really cool when you remember that 90% ownership that Sam had in Alameda. So Sam takes customer money, leverages it, lends it to himself. The collateral falls, and he still gets to keep the money. He doesn't have to add any more money. He doesn't have to worry about that loan being called. It's kind of a nice gig if you can get it. So Ray described this as a complete failure of corporate management controls and the worst he's ever seen in 30 years of running bankrupt firms. Now, on September 27, remember, that was early. Bloomberg disclosed the relationship between Alameda and FTX in terms of margin and deposits. September, later that month, on the 27th, the president of FTX announces he's stepping down. No reason was given, but he's bailing out of town. Now, you're an investor. You see that you've got a cease and desist from a federal agency. You've got a fraudulent misrepresentation of the relationship between Alameda and FTX. You see the president resign for no reason. What? Why aren't you tucking tail and pulling everything out by now? Good, fair question. But most people don't. October, the state of Texas announces an investigation against FTX for the selling of unregistered securities and misrepresentation. November 2nd, time rolls on here. November 2nd, CoinDesk, a crypto news site, reported a significant portion of Alameda's assets were held in FTX. FTX issued its own coin. I alluded to that a little earlier. This coin was called FTT. So basically how that works is, I'm FTX. You send me $1 million. I say, okay, I'm going to give you 1,000,000 FTT. This is your coin. And you can spend that FTT anywhere you want right here at FTX. So the thing is, FTT was only traded on FTX. Other exchanges didn't really accept it. That's a big red flag. CoinDesk, November 2nd, discloses that Alameda's assets were held in FTT, approximately $6.2 billion of FTT. Now that's interesting. That kind of makes you pause. but it makes you gasp when you understand at the time there was only 5 billion of FTT in circulation. So think about it. You buy a stock in a company, you think there's 100,000 shares outstanding. All of a sudden, you find out there may be 300,000 shares outstanding. So that should effectively cut the price to a third of what it was. Crypto is no different. If you have more and more and more coins produced or sold, the value of them drops. And so FTX had never disclosed that there were this many coins outstanding. It only published or disclosed that there were 5 billion in circulation. Sounds like fraud to me. Well, November 6th, Binance, the huge Chinese cryptocurrency exchange that initially helped fund FTX, announces it has some of the FTT remaining from that deal, but it's selling all of it. It's about 500 million. It's not a small slug. Well, like I said, FTT had a very thin market. It was only traded on FTX. The mere fact of Binance selling $500 million of it would cause a very sharp drop in the price of FTT. It would have a huge outsized effect on the price. This caused a run on FTT and even impacted other cryptos. Kind of started the beginning of FTX's financial crisis. On November the 8th, Zhao, the chairman of Binance, he announced he would purchase FTX due to liquidity issues, a liquidity crisis, as he described it, and added that other exchanges should avoid and not trade or accept FTT. This led to FTT, which was already depressed, dropping another 80%. And erased over $2 billion in value in just a few minutes. November the 9th, the very next day, remember, 8th, Zhao announces he's going to buy FTX. The very next day, November the 9th, Bloomberg writes an article and discloses that the merger was unlikely, that the SEC and CFC, the Commodity Futures Commission, had begun investigations into FTX. Later that day, Binance said they would not go through with the acquisition. FTX stopped processing withdrawals, which I'm like, who's waited till now to withdraw money from FTX? So, November the 10th, Sam tweets to his customers that they have no reason to cover. Here's what he says, and this is actually on November the 7th. He repeats it on the 10th. FTX has enough to cover all client holdings. We don't invest client assets, even in treasuries. We've been processing all withdrawals and will continue to be. No fear. Have you ever seen Animal House? Remember Kevin there at the end in the middle of the street yelling as the riot's going on that all is well, all is well? This is when you know that a firm's really about to get screwed, when you have the CEO yelling in the middle of the street, all is well, all is well. Later the day, the SEC in the Bahamas froze the assets and appointed a liquidator. The team running FTX resigned, the whole team. Everybody walked out. On November the 11th, FTX, over 100 subsidiaries and Alameda all filed bankruptcy in Delaware. Debts were estimated to be $8 billion plus. Several firms were also impacted by FTX, such as BlockFi. BlockFi suspended all operations. Also of note is that during this day or the preceding 36 hours, there were $473 million siphoned off from FTX. These were stable coins like Tether, which were then exchanged for Ether, two widely known, well accepted cryptocurrencies. Basically, FTX was hacked by someone with the passwords. Many online people, started yelling at all users to delete the FTX mobile app because they were also compromised. So basically, this user through FTX had the ability to go to your phone, move money from your accounts to their accounts. That's very interesting. So far, nobody's been fingered or named, but there are limited choices because it was a relatively small firm. Now, since the bankruptcy, obviously information has started flowing. We know it wasn't market volatility or market risk that sank FTX, but fraud. Perhaps the biggest fraud since Madoff with the money. I watched another site, a YouTube channel called Law and Lumber, and they posted a class action lawsuit against Sam Bankman and Caroline and a few of the other individuals because you can't sue FTX now, they're in bankruptcy court. And the attorneys make some interesting statements. They point out that Sam, quote, tricked people into thinking FTX was worth far more than it was, and essentially used FTX and his customer deposits as his personal slush fund. If that doesn't sum it up pretty well, his personal slush fund. I'm really kind of mad I didn't think of that term or applying that term, but you got to give credit to the attorneys. And realistically, attorneys are paid by the word. They usually have the gift of gab, or at least writing, but it's perfect. If you look at what actually was happening to the money in the customers' funds deposits, it was nothing more than a slush fund. The filing goes on to state that he paid employees and vendors in FTT, the cryptocurrency of FTX, and he loaned customer deposits to Alameda, which he owned 90% of, and even had a secret backdoor into FTX trading code that allowed him to siphon off assets without being discovered. He used that money to cover losses, acquire real estate for him and his family, like I said, $300 million worth, and he became a huge political contributor, second only to George Soros. I guess this was his version of effective altruism. Keep in mind, just a few months previously, Sam was testifying before Congress how safe FTX was. He claimed there were firewalls between Alameda and FTX in an August interview with Bloomberg. Now, a firewall is just a artificial construction in business where one division is completely separate and has no exchange with another division or section. It is legal and is enforceable. He stated that there were different offices. He stated there was no shared personnel. He stated they were not the same company. Every single statement an outright lie. Hell, the whole inner circle lived in the same house. Sam and Caroline were romantically involved, at least in the past, and they were all intimate. The exact opposite of an arm's length operation. Alameda and FTX had loans and asset swaps repeatedly. The exchange and the hedge fund were nothing more than kissing cousins. And of course, Sam owned both. Now, he claims he doesn't know what was going on. But let me ask you, if you own 90% of a corporation and you have billions being moved around, lending billions to that, borrowing billions from that, getting billions in cash from that company, do you have any idea what's going on? It'd be a little unusual if you didn't. And keep in mind, Alameda bought or created more than 150 different companies. Most of them were shell companies or close to it. They had different assets. They had loans, swaps were all run through it. Why? Why the lies? Why the deception? Why moving money from one account to another and creating duplicate deposits? And that's what they did. For example, you would wire Alameda $1 to buy crypto with. Well, Alameda would send it to FTX, and FTX would email you and say, hey, we've received your dollar. Only thing was Alameda should zero out that dollar, but they didn't. So you had $1 at Alameda, you had $1 at FTX, but you really didn't know about the dollar at Alameda. But they could use this to increase their assets and do all sorts of things with. Now, this is a structure that, you have to keep in mind. Sam wasn't stupid. He says he was a poor manager, but he's not stupid. You don't do something this complex, this obtuse, because you wanted to appropriate some client money for yourself. A simple Ponzi scheme would have sufficed in that regard. Now, this was something else. This structure couldn't hide fraud, but it could hide the money. Where's the money go? What's it used for? Something you see in money laundering operations. And he was processing a ton of money. We don't know where all it went. The news has been full of stories about, $8 to $10 billion is missing. Okay, where's it gone? One example of FTX's processing is or cash funding operations. They raised $420 million in a cash offering once from well-known investors, many of the hedge funds, Tom Brady, etc. But instead of placing it in the exchange, $300 million went to Sam, who took the customer money and used it for his personal benefit. What exactly, we don't know. But what happened to the other $120 million? We don't know. You have all these different accounts being created. You have the money being double counted or triple counted, and it gets lost in the confusion of it all. We know there's fraud there. There are things that are without a doubt illegal there, but in terms of tracing that exact flow of money, we don't know. Now, the filing that I referred to earlier, the class action lawsuit, refers to the relationship between FTX and Alameda as, quote, murky. But there's nothing murky about it. They were intimate. They worked closely together as their owner wished. They also have a statement in that filing about the Glass-Steagall Act. The Glass-Steagall Act required commercial banks to refrain from investment banking activities. Now, a commercial bank makes loans, takes deposits, makes loans. An investment bank issues stocks and trades stocks, may serve as a market maker for stocks. So they're really two wholly separate functions. Well, Glass-Steagall, Glass-Steagall prevented banks from having investment operations, which initially this was to protect depositors from bank speculation in stocks. Now, the attorneys state that there's nothing like this in the crypto world to protect customer deposits. This to me is somewhat misleading, and if I were an attorney, I would drop this argument. First of all, FTX was a crypto exchange. Customers knew it invested in volatile crypto assets and traded those assets. It was never registered as a bank. Glass-Steagall never applied, wouldn't have applied, and more importantly, wouldn't have helped. There were numerous laws, both in Bahama and the US, that FTX, Alameda, Sam violated without a shadow of a doubt, which kind of begs the question, why hasn't he been arrested yet? But these laws prevent commingling of funds, misallocation, misrepresentation, fraud, all of these different activities. There are already laws on the books, and they were ignored. I don't think another law would have made consumers any safer. It's not rational to argue that it would. It detracts from the actual salient points made in the filing. Glass-Steagall, it was actually harmful for banks and consumers, and that's why it was done away with. One of the few good things Bill Clinton did. Arguing it should be in place offers no advantage to the lawsuit. Now, Sam regularly transferred funds from client accounts using his backdoor, as we refer to it, and altered the financial records with the help of others in the inner circle as to not alert anyone else in the company or outside of it. He ended up moving billions of dollars of assets with no consumer having any knowledge, much less giving consent. Now, one of his insiders, Trabucco, this guy is a piece. He traded with all the wisdom, intelligence of a drunk zombie, taking high-risk positions he didn't understand. He apparently even tried to short Binance futures. This is a tweet from Binance where it talks about a market maker from a smaller future exchange, which we now believe was FTX, tried to attack Binance. No one was liquidated as we use index price, not futures prices for liquidations. Only the attacker lost a bunch of money, and that was that. And here you can see the steep drop as apparently FTX was trying to short the stock or the futures contracts, but there was no continuing downside. It bounced right back up immediately. So most likely this was a significant loss for FTX. Now, Sam repeatedly presented to the public, to members of Congress, a picture of woke beauty, superior intelligence, form, grace. You know, he presented this image to the elites, while in actuality, it was nothing more than a collection of inexperienced kids treating customer money like it was monopoly money, who kept talking about sustainability or ESG. ESG is environmental, social, and government. It's kind of a corporate standard for measuring whether companies are woke enough or not. Sam talked about altruism and perceived virtues. All of this while he and his gang were scamming the hell out of everyone. Here's a tweet 3 days before they bankrupted. A bunch of unfounded rumors been circulating. FTX keeps audited financials, etc. Audited by who? And though it never published any of these audits, and even though it slows us down sometimes, we are highly regulated. They weren't regulated by anybody. Like I say, it was just a bunch of post-pubescent teens doing whatever they were doing, however they wanted to do it. Caroline, his girlfriend or former girlfriend's down here talking about specific balance sheet. A portion of a balance sheet had been released showing about $4 billion in personal loans. Ultimately, we found out that was to SBF, to Sam. This balance sheet is for a subset of our corporate entities. We have $10 billion of assets that aren't reflected there. Again, $10 billion in paper assets. So this was 3 days before they declared bankruptcy. This is, again, this all is well kind of attitude. And interestingly, this tweet has been deleted. Now, if you want specific examples of FTX's fraud, well, FTX had nearly $1.5 billion in Bitcoin liabilities, but did not own or have a single Bitcoin. They were selling, in essence, rights to Bitcoin. People would pay the price, $16,000, $20,000, $30,000, whatever the price was at the time. And FTX would say, hey, you own a Bitcoin. Here's the ledger account showing you own a Bitcoin. Yet the Bitcoin they never bought. They did not own or transfer a single Bitcoin. Keep in mind, $1.5 billion. This was demand for Bitcoin, customer demand for Bitcoin that they absorbed from real Bitcoin because people trusted them. And it essentially expanded the supply of Bitcoin artificially. So instead of that $1.5 billion going into Bitcoin and sustaining the price, raising the price, obviously it didn't go into Bitcoin. Nothing happened to the price of Bitcoin, and it was just part of the fraud. Now, I actually had a picture of that account ledger, but the picture I'm finding out now is corrupted. So I apologize for that. Well, how about actual embezzlement? Here's a snapshot of an entry in a suit. Related party loans receivable of $4.1 billion at Alameda, from Alameda, consisted primarily of a loan to Paperbird. Interestingly, Paperbird was owned by guess who? Sam. I love the name, Paper Bird. If that isn't sticking it to you, I don't know what is. Loan to Paper Bird 2.3 billion, and 3 loans to Sam Fried of 1 billion. So he basically ended up with over 3 billion. One to Singh of 543 million, and one to Sami of 55 million. Now, so this is really nothing more than embezzlement. Other examples, FTX generated billions in Solana, Bitcoin, other shadow coins as they're referred to, with 0 real coins owned. Then Sam lent himself money from his depositors against these coins as collateral. So he would take customer money that he did not invest in the coins but credited to their account anyway, and lend it to himself using these coins as the collateral. Nice trick, again, if you can get it. Alameda, the market maker, also had an exclusive API key. API key is just code that allows access to an application. Well, the thing about Alameda's API was it allowed them faster access or trading than what the customers could do. So if Alameda's algorithm, if their computer saw a big trade coming down the pipeline that would move the price of a coin, they could put their order in ahead of this, either buy or buy the coin. And then when the customer order hits, they could be the one selling the coin to the customer and keep the profit for themselves. It's called for trading, and it's highly illegal everywhere. I talk about how there's no doubt they were violating the law. Just another example. Trabuco, my favorite drunk zombie. Guy has the financial acumen of a hormonal 12-year-old. He bought Dogecoin because, quote, Elon tweeted it. Now, speaking of doing stupid things to burn money, that's it. Dumbest, anyway, you get the idea. Alameda took in tons of cash from Alameda during the kimchi premium, then ran it through a network of 100 different banks. Why? This is how laundry is done. BlockFi. This is great. BlockFi received a $400 million credit line from FTX. Remember, BlockFi had some troubles, so FTX extends them credit for $400 million. It borrowed $250 million, but it received it not in cash, but in FTT tokens. BlockFi then lent $680 million to Alameda, not in FTT tokens, but in cash. So let me simplify that whole arrangement as this. It's trash for cash. That's it. That's always, always fraud. No exceptions. Other examples, FTX created a institutional use only liquidity pool. And a liquidity pool generally is just a computer market maker, an algorithm that holds a stash of a coin that buys and sells out of that account to help provide liquidity. Because some coins, there isn't always enough sellers, depending on the time of the day or the thinness of the market. So these liquidity pools help provide a supply of coins, both buying and selling those coins, to keep the market moving, to keep trades going. Well, they had an 8 quadrillion, million, billion, quadrillion, 8 quadrillion fake AMC tokens. The amount of this pool was 15 million times the size of the outstanding stock of AMC. Now, nobody else knew about this pool as far as, in the market, the AMC traders or whatever. And the only reason for an existence of a pool this size is to bail out naked short positions. Okay. Now, how do we know this existed? Well, there's an SEC filing showing FTX created 8 quadrillion fake tokens to bail out a short hedge position, naked short position. Okay. So we've seen that. Now, what is a short position? A short position in the market is basically selling something you don't own, and it's legal, but there's a way to do it. For example, suppose you want to sell something that you don't own. The reason you would do it is because you're able to sell it at the price today, and then you think the price of that asset is going to drop in the future. So you sell it for $100 today. A month from now, the price drops to 80. So you can buy it at 80. And the reason, you do have to buy it. So the way you make money in the market is you buy low, you sell high. But you can do that in any order. You can sell high, then buy low. The way it's legally executed is you want to sell the stock. Will you actually borrow the stock from somebody like your stockbroker who arranges the borrowing? So if you think Apple price is too high, you can borrow shares of Apple and then turn around and sell them in the market at whatever the current market price is. And then sometime later, you have to go back out into the market, buy that same number of shares, and pay back the loan, the number of shares that you borrowed, plus interest to the broker. That's a legal short sale, and it happens all the time. It helps force kind of a market discipline, because if people could only buy stocks, then the perspective of the people who think a stock is overpriced couldn't show up in the market price. Only people with positive thoughts would be able to participate in the market. Short selling allows the people with negative thoughts and the people with positive thoughts to participate, and somewhere they meet in the middle at a effective price, a fair price. So that's how, prices work. Well, in this case, FTX wanted to sell AMC, shares they did not own, but they never went out and borrowed it. Okay. So this is called a naked short position. So they didn't actually borrow the stocks. Market makers can actually establish a short position without borrowing the stock. It's called a market maker exemption. They can do things. This is supposed to be a short-term tool to help them when there's large demand. So the law technically provides them the right to do it. But creating 8 quadrillion tokens out of client money in order to cover losses on a short position, that's fraud. We already talked about the double accounting. Oh, let me show you this also. This is part of the ledger. Now, I don't know if you can see this. Let me blow this up. But here you've got the Uniswap is called the protocol. It's technically the material that the token is made out of. And here you see FTX selling these tokens in AMC. But here you see they almost never buy them back or receive any price. Now this chart also shows you the size of the position they took during this month. This was when AMC was blowing up, or right before it did. And so as the price gets higher, remember, if you're short, you need the price to fall because you're going to have to buy that stock. Well, if the price instead rises, you have losses because you already bought it and you need to buy it at a lower price to make money. If the price rises, you're effectively losing money. So if you're losing money and you've got positions with other brokers or clients, you're getting margin calls. Hence the production of these tokens or credits to cover their naked shorting account. Now, we already know there was double accounting. You had money wired to Alameda, transferred to FTX, which was still counted as Alameda assets. I alluded to this a little earlier. But keeping it on Alameda's books allowed them to use that money as collateral on loans from FTX. So they would ship the money to FTX and then borrow it, pledging their collateral, the same customer dollar they end up borrowing. Then FTX would sweep the funds they had into margin accounts and were able to lend it for crypto purchases. And these were usually shit coins like FTT. This, along with the fake tokens created, allowed Alameda to prop up prices to create a valuation of several billion. Think of it as suddenly $2 million turns into $200 million on paper. The industry even had a name for this. It was called Sam coins. So, again, Alameda would receive a dollar, transfer it to FTX, but kept that dollar on the book. FTX would then lend Alameda that dollar. Alameda would pledge the dollar they had as collateral. Okay, so you've got $1 here, a dollar here. You've got an additional dollar in loans. And then they would take this money and use it for what? Now, if FTX would leverage that dollar that they received 2, 3, 4, 20 times, okay, you can get some large value loans and cash coming your way. We don't know all the exact details. We just have an overview. Like I say, the books, according to John Ray, are an absolute disaster. Again, never really audited, at least using GAAP accounting, traditional accounting standards, and so there's still a lot more details to discover. But we know this type of cash transference, loan balances back and forth, running money through shell companies, led to Alameda pledging illiquid or fake collateral to borrow money to finance bets. Many of those bets got margin calls as markets went down this past year, leading to even more theft of FTX customer funds to put out that fire. They had borrowed money from customers, lost it, had to borrow even more money to make the payments on their margin calls they were getting. Alameda had already blown through whatever reserves they had. They had zero liquidity. They should have declared bankruptcy at this point, but they didn't. They kept on, even publicly pushing their own virtue and securing politicians as allies. All the while, they were making heavily leveraged bets in hopes of not collapsing into a black hole. Another scam pulled by Sam would be with regards to ESG. I mentioned this earlier, environmental, social, and governance. It's a green standard propagated by liberal investors such as Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, a huge money management firm. I'm even now hearing calls for Fink to resign. It's not an investment standard, nor is it tied to investment performance, not in the least. It's simply an effort to change the culture of corporate America to back, a climate change agenda and evaluate companies on diversity rather than financial performance. So it's a non-financial metric that certain investors like BlackRock are trying to impose on corporations to get them to conform to their ideology. Sam, the thing is, Sam encouraged this publicly, but recently admitted this persona of being an ESG activist was nothing more than a ruse, calling it, quote, a dumb game we Westerners play where we say the right shibboleths and everyone likes us, end quote. He actually referred to ESG as a perversion. His words. Now, Sam wasn't an idiot. Sam virtue signaled. He was a poser, but he was just playing the game as many required it to be played. And he was good at it. He became a media darling. He succeeded wildly. He knew what woke people thought and exploited it. That gave him the power and access he desired. That gave him free resources, access to even more and more resources. But it all simply just fueled the fraud and compounded the corruption. Here's a tweet or a series of tweets from Sam, where somebody points out, you're really good at talking ethics for someone who kind of saw it all as a game with winners and losers. And Sam goes, yeah, haha, I had to be. It's what reputations are made of to some extent. I feel bad for those who got effed by it. By this dumb game we woke Westerners play where we say all the right shibboleths and so everyone likes us. He admitted it was a con game. Now, there are reports that Sam gave, as of this morning, $70 million in political donations, not the 40 or 50 first mentioned. And also, I saw where Binance is now being investigated for money laundering. The more we know, the worse it gets. But be encouraged. There is good news. Sam has actually said he wants to start a new business so he can make more money to pay back the customer money he lost. You can't make this kind of shit up. I'm sure Kevin O'Leary in all of his infinite wisdom will be his first investor. I wonder why the delay. Because we all know that Sam, isn't all this mess or trash that matters. What matters right now is trying to do right by customers. That's it. Remember my rule number 2, stupid should hurt? Keep in mind, 30 days have passed since Sam filed bankruptcy. Numerous crimes were committed, obviously. There have been 0 arrests to date. Why? Interestingly, Bernie Madoff was arrested 14 years ago today, the 11th. Today, one day after his sons turned him in. So what are they waiting on with Sam? Why hadn't he been arrested yet? Your guess is as good as mine. But can we say political influence? So that's the overview. Next time, we'll take a look at more detail on FTX and its impact on crypto or the contagion effects with other firms in the market. Now, remember, supposedly extremely savvy investors put millions with this guy, billions with this guy. Did they do it on a whimsy or did they lose a bet? Tune in, subscribe, like. Don't let Chunk or Tallulah down. They're depending on you. As always, also looking for any ideas of interest to you for future discussion. Feel free to comment below this video or DM me at Twitter, Moffett on Money. My time is up. I thank you for yours.